Welcome to the De-Escalation Conversations podcast. I am here with Wayne Parham from Police Magazine. He's a senior editor, as I just told you, and he's, I think, my new best friend. Wayne, welcome to the show. And let me start off by asking, how does Police Magazine, you guys have been around for a little while. I know I found you when I was a new officer, and that was well over 30 years ago, like 35 years. Have you guys been around that long?
We're in our 47th year of publication. And we were actually founded by an officer in Southern California, and I believe he started selling magazines out of the trunk of his car initially. And even when you go to policemag.com, our website, you can now see covers way back into the 80s. And so it's interesting to scroll through and see some of the old firearms, some of the old holsters. We can't necessarily go to the inside content that far back, but even when you search our website, not the magazine portion of our website, but just the main website, you search a topic, you may look at a story from 2 weeks ago, you may see a story from 2004.
Wow.
So when you really want to dig into a topic, you just you go there and poke around and see what you find. One great thing is we've been around 47 years. I'm senior editor, but our editor, David Griffith, has been editor of Police Magazine for slightly more than 20 years now, I believe. So imagine the wealth of knowledge that he brings to the table. And we don't think of this as an industry. Law enforcement is not an industry. Sure, there's an industry, training, holster, upfitting of vehicles, fleet management. There's an industry that supports law enforcement, but law enforcement is truly a profession. Mm-hmm. Somebody has chosen that profession to go out and serve their fellow man and their community. And so we never think of it as an industry. We always see it as a profession. One interesting thing is we realize that we never know what content, I say content, I know that's a younger person term, story, let's say what story we produce that could have some impact somewhere. Last year we launched a series of stories called 10 Tips. And basically, we brainstorm topics and then we find somebody that can, bring an interesting conversation to the table. I know currently I'm working with a crime scene person at the state level, and she and I emailed earlier today 10 tips for securing a crime scene. Sure, it's taught to people at the academy, but let's take time to talk to somebody who specializes in forensics, specializes in crime scenes, and get her to share tips. Now, I don't mean academic tips. The way I explain our 10 tip series to people is, imagine you were at a conference or a banquet and sat down and somebody learned what you did and they said, hey, what's the best way I do this? What 10 bullet points can you think of that you would share with people? We've also done that 10 tips for field training officers. I talked to a gentleman I know that runs the FTO school for Kansas City PD. Or how about we saw a cold blast was going to come through sometime back in maybe December. So we thought, somebody's got to have some great tips to share with officers when they have to go work in the cold. Now, some places, people are used to being in the cold all the time. Some places, say if you come down south, like Georgia, where I am, we're used to a little bit of cold, but I won't say that our officers are as skilled at knowing how to handle the cold as somebody is in New York. So I talked to somebody at the Erie County Sheriff's Office, right there around Buffalo, where you get the lake effect snow, and then they measure snow in feet and have, I believe, twice this year. And I said, think of 10 tips that you would share with an officer that would apply to any officer that has to work in the cold. And, he put pen to paper and came up with tips, and we talked, put a story in front of it. And we just like to be able to bring little tidbits like that may drive a conversation. We did one recently, 10 tips for crisis communication. I reached out to some PIOs I know, and they suggested I contact Dion Waugh, the PIO in Boulder, Colorado. They had a mass shooting that was also an officer death. Unfortunately, that officer was one of the first friends she made at the department when she came on as PIO. So when I want to provide 10 tips that somebody can read, and that can be kind of a seed for opportunity of conversation, I like to seek out these people that have something, some true knowledge to bring to the table. And, the funny thing we found is when I start doing that with people, they are quick to jump in and they love the idea. It's almost like if you say, I want to schedule an interview with you, that's more intimidating. But if they can help create those tips, no pressure, make them conversational, and then we get together and talk. I put a little story around that leads into the tip. Back for Christmas, I didn't know how this was going to go. If it was going to be humorous, serious, casual, but there are always officers that have to work holidays. Maybe younger officers who just draw the straw and pay their dues and work holidays, including Christmas. So we had one called 10 Tips from the North Pole for Officers Working Christmas.
That's awesome.
I contacted North Pole PD, Alaska. And they had a little fun with it.
I bet they did.
They said something, remember the nice. Their point was these are good people you serve, and it may be a bad day for them, but they're good people, nice people. Remember the nice. But don't forget the naughty was another point. They said Christmas is a great time to serve warrants. And one interesting takeaway I had from that experience also was they said, as an officer working holidays, you may think it's bad that you're away from family, you're having to work, but you're providing good service. Think about the dispatcher. Be kind to the dispatcher. You're out on patrol. At least you get to move around, drive, go see things. I know you have to catch calls, but at least you're looking at Christmas lights and have something to keep you occupied. That dispatcher is usually in a darkened room somewhere, just answering phone, resolving a problem. But think as an officer who might gripe and grumble that I have to work Christmas, don't carry that over to your dispatcher. They're cooped up inside.
That's great advice.
So it's been really a fun undertaking, and we just want to help drive conversations that ultimately promote officer safety.
Well, you definitely do that, and the library of articles, the archives of articles that you have available, where like the 10 tips. Just taking that as a quick example, I may have learned those crime scene preservation techniques from my department, but I get to hear something from somebody else who's not in my normal realm of influence, not in my normal realm of information that comes to me. And the beautiful part about that is when that happens, I just get to expand my knowledge base. I get to hear different perspectives that maybe I wouldn't have been able to hear. On the weather thing, I remember when Texas, year before last, Texas got hammered very unexpectedly, and several days of power outages. And so they normally don't have that weather like what you talked about, so being able to get somebody who works in that weather to go, hey, by the way, don't forget to have in your trunk these things. Mm-hmm. Remember the traffic accident, the sudden onset blizzard on the East Coast, I want to say Vermont or somewhere, completely unexpected. And there was hundreds of cars that were stranded in the snowstorm for a couple of days before they could get to them. Well, if you were an officer or a state trooper and you were caught in that, but you had listened or read the article on the 10 tips and you prepped for that, you'd be dialed in, even though the weather was unexpected. Just being prepared. So it's great.
What you want on any topic is you want somebody to say, hey, I never thought of that.
Yeah, completely.
And that's what we hope to help provide. I mean, then the 10 tips is just one small thing we do. Corresponding series, 5 things you need to know. So we're doing a series along that. 5 things you need to know when buying ballistic helmets. 5 things you need to know, or 5 things to know when buying patrol vehicles. 5 things to know when buying ballistic shields. And we talk to companies that have expertise, but we say we're not going to make this about a specific product. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, if you're at a conference or a banquet or wedding reception and somebody said, hey, you produce and sell ballistic shields, hey, we're thinking about that. What kind of things do I need to consider?
Yeah, that way the chiefs and sheriffs,
5 things right there.
Yeah, the chiefs and sheriffs and or the even the officers who are making personal purchases or making buying decisions for their agencies, they now get to have they're able to make better informed decisions about what equipment or what to look for when they're speccing out the bids, if they have to do a bid system, or just, wait, what do I pay attention to when I'm buying this? I remember the first time I bought an ankle holster. Boy, I wish I would have known 5 things to look for when buying an ankle holster, because I wouldn't have wasted my money on that first one I bought.
That can be said about everything in life, I believe.
Pretty much. Well, Wayne, policemag.com, for those people that are driving and listening to this, for our listeners, it'll be in our show notes. And Wayne, thanks for being here. Thanks for taking the time for this bonus episode for the De-Escalation Conversations podcast. I know that there's a lot of things, resources that you offer, articles, just you're in print.
We're in print.
You're in online. You actually have a video series now too, right?
Yes, we've been doing what we call coffee break with police experts, which is what I've been recording across the hall.
Well, you know what?
And then Doug Wiley's been across the hall in a separate room. We've had 2 rooms going. I've talked to a lot of the expo participants and companies, and Doug's talked to a lot of the instructors. So we have a lot of content there where we have short 8, 10, 12-minute conversations with people.
That's a perfect snackable size video. And for our listeners, just as a little hint, I actually did 2 of those video interviews with Doug on bank code and on de-escalation. And you can also look up articles. There's 3 articles that I'm featured in that were written by Doug on bank code and de-escalation. And I think the third one was brain-centric design, but you can't hold me to that one because I'm old and I forget stuff. But do a search for my name on policemag.com, and you'll come up with those articles. So, Wayne, again, thanks for being here. Thanks for taking the time with us. And listeners, check out policemag.com and definitely subscribe and get the updates for Police Magazine. It's going to save you a lot of time and effort and just give you the information that you need. As always, until next time, stay safe.